Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Psych in Time. Anyways, on to the show. Here at Psych in Time, we use cutting-edge time travel technology to revisit the past and understand how psychologists form their experiments and drew their conclusions. In tonight's episode, we will be exploring the topic of addiction. Our time machines will transport us back to the late 70s in order to visit Bruce K. Alexander, a psychologist and professor at Simon Fraser University. His experiment regarding addiction is still taught to students today. Without further ado, let's go and visit Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander, welcome to the show. I understand you're busy, so we'll get straight to business.
First off, I'm Dr. Alexander of Simon Fraser University in Canada, and I teach psychology.
Well, we're here to talk about your addiction progress today. So, what spurred your interest in this topic?
Well, when I first started working at the university, my superiors told me that I had to take this mandatory course on addiction, and I had to teach it to my students. And I didn't really know much about the topic, so I visited a substance abuse clinic in Vancouver. And there I met this individual who he couldn't properly work at his job without being under the influence of drugs. And so I found that really interesting, and I thought maybe that applied to different human beings as well.
So how exactly did this substance abuse clinic help you in your research?
Well, I assume that this man, and many others, use drugs to cope with their situations in life rather than just use it for traditional reasons like being addicted to it. So maybe they needed it for their surroundings, and maybe it helped them just fit in with society.
Can you explain how you use this idea to create an accurate and functional experiment?
Well, what I did is I used rats to test out the addiction experiment, and I used rats because they're very similar to human beings in that they're active creatures, and well, animal testing is much safer than using humans. So what we did was we created a fancy house for the rats, and it was a co-ed. It was perfect temperature, it was regulated, it had painted scenery, so it was as nice as a human hotel, and there was lots of space. It was really nice compared to the traditional lab crates. So what I did is I had two groups of rats, one living in the substandard regular rat cages, and the other living in this nice polished colony. So what I did is I took the two subject groups, and my colleagues and I performed two separate experiments. One is called seduction, and the other is withdrawal. And the first one, seduction, involved placing 16 rats in the two separate colonies each. And what we did was we provided both groups with a bottle of morphine-laced water with sucrose. Rats usually don't like bitter taste, so the sugar helped them drink it. And what we did is, next to that bottle of morphine-laced water, we had regular tap water, which looked kind of nasty, and we wanted to see which water they actually drank. So after this was conducted, we moved on to the withdrawal experiment, where we wanted to touch upon withdrawal symptoms that occur in human beings with addiction. So rats are obviously a safer alternative, so we made both sets of rats addicted to the drug, and then we waited 57 days. After the 57 days, we introduced both of the rats to normal tap water, and we saw how they reacted after being taken away from their drug.
So what were the results of this experiment?
I'm sorry, that's the bell.
Right.
I have to teach my class, so
Thanks for coming on the show.
thank you.
That was fun.
My assistant, Dr. Combs, will be here shortly to talk to you about the results. So
Okay.
have a nice day, guys. See you.
Hello, Dr. Combs.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So here you can fill us in on Dr. Alexander's project on Red Board.
Right, so did he tell you about the design of the experiment? Did he update you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so in the rat park we had two different water bottles, one with the dirty water and one with the sucrose-filled morphine water. Narcotics, you could say. Right. So, as predicted, the rats in the cramped laboratory cage environment they went for the morphine water, they had no resistance. But then if you look at comparing that to the rats in the rat park, they did not go for the morphine water at all.
They went for the
The regular water, right. So we then proceeded to add a chemical called nalazone into the rat park water, the morphine-filled water. What that does is nalazone suppresses the opioids in the water, and all that's left is basically a sugar water, which they had no problem drinking. So the results of this is that in a social environment like the rat park, rats, they don't want to drink anything that will inhibit their social behaviors.
and in cages, the rats opposed to that.
Yeah, in cages, the rats had no problem going for the morphine-filled water.
So did this support your hypothesis?
Yes, it did support my hypothesis. But this was the seduction experiment. I believe he told you about the withdrawal experiment as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Expand on that.
Right. So for the withdrawal experiment, after 57 days of morphine, we gradually made them more accustomed to, this was in the rat park, by the way. We gradually made them more accustomed to the regular water, and they had no problem adjusting to it. I mean, it was gradual. It wasn't like take away the morphine, give the water the next day. So they had no issues adjusting to that. And our conclusions for this was that in a social environment where the rats were happy, where they were part of the environment, they felt that they were socially like part of the environment, they did not go for the morphine-filled water, and they were able to make the switch back to regular water.
So what does this say about our human, how does it correlate to our human life?
Human life, basically, as I believe Alexander said, basically rats and humans are alike. Their cognitive senses are quite similar. So what I believe is that addiction is not, it's not physiological, if you understand what I'm saying. Addiction is more mental. It's all in the mind.
It's based on your surroundings.
Right, based on the surroundings, exactly.
Well, thanks for sharing your contributions
No problem.
on the
Anytime.
show. And
Thank you for having me.
well, to see the effects of Bruce Alexander's experiment, you'd have to go back into the future and see how it changed psychology. Now that we're in the future, we have Dr. Katowski, who's going to explain to us the contributions that Alexander's research has made to psychology today.
Al Jordan.
Yeah, I called yesterday about the psychology project on the rat park, and I told you I'd call today between 11 to 2 to ask you a few questions regarding the experiment and like your opinions and what your thoughts on it are.
Yes, remember, yes.
Okay. So I'll start with the question. So, to you as a psychologist, what is addiction?
True addiction is a combination of increasing tolerance and signs of withdrawal when in the absence of a substance.
Okay. The second question is, since you're familiar with the rat park experiment, do you believe the conclusions of the experiment can be useful when dealing with human behavior, since the experiment was carried out on rats?
I think that it is important to see where you can use or apply the information to a human condition, but that was a laboratory, and there were many other factors that are in the real world that were not considered as part of the experiment.
Yeah, so that brings me to like if you were to redo the experiment or something, how would you put in, like, what other variables would you add or factors would you take out so that it pertains more to humans?
I think that the real bottom line flaw in the experiment is that it's really very difficult to fight an addictive craving when there's no other distraction. And in that kind of experiment, there's nothing else going on. So in the real world, the whole point is that you set up an environment where there's other healthier alternatives. And so somewhere there, I think there should be some healthier, non-addictive alternatives built into options for the mice. I'm not sure how that would be, but that could be alternatives that would then be more realistic in terms of choices as opposed to this or that. Just two choices. Drugs or no drugs.
Yeah, I got you. And then when you're counseling your patients who have any drug addictions, alcohol addictions, or alcohol abuse, do the results of the experiment ever like affect it, or do they ever come into like your mind and like you try to use the results or like the results in the process you do to try to get rid of the addiction based on like
Well, the one major aspect that is part of the process of developing a relapse prevention plan for somebody who's trying to stay away from any substance is to respect and recognize the power of the addictive substance, and that the power of it isn't just a one-dimensional power. There's a chemical process that goes on. Once you introduce a drug, there is this craving for the drug when when you're in a withdrawal place, and then there is the absence of there being any other, like we were saying, any other factors, any other alternatives that just makes it even more powerful. So, and therefore more difficult to stay away from the substance. So, in the experiment, that's sort of demonstrated, and that because of that does become part of the decision-making process in developing a relapse prevention plan. You want to develop a relapse prevention plan that's powerful, that helps to balance the power of the addictive substance and the qualities that make it difficult to stay away from. So it overlaps. I know, that experiment that's not the first, Alexander, that was not the first time that it was recognized the power of addiction. But
okay.
It is consistent with it.
Yeah. And the last question is, like, from your experience, do more of the addicts come from a substandard society compared to what?
I think that it balances out because there are so many in the substandard society, as you put it, the privileged, where they're already feeling.
Up next, we have psychologist Patel, who can expand on the contributions that Alexander's project made on today's psychology.
Thank you for having me on the show.
So, would you like to add on to what?
Yeah, so basically the Rat Park experiment, when it was first initially introduced, it wasn't like a really big thing. Like, people didn't pay attention to it because there's other experiments at the time. Right. But the thing that brought like more attention to it was that World War II victims, a lot of them suffered from like, a lot of them had like mental disorders and all of that, and like went to drugs and all of that for relaxation. So the contribution is that it widened the field of addiction within psychology. It led to a lot more experiments, a lot more debates, and a lot more questions. And this allowed for more rehab to take place, and more effective rehab, instead of just like sending them to a mental asylum or just like giving up on them. So I think it helped in a positive way, but it also helped it also like contributed in a negative way. Like, people are arguing too much, and like that sometimes hinders the research that's being done. But the major contribution is that it led to a lot more experiments. It led to people like questioning the brain, questioning drugs and how they affect the brain. So I think that it was a really good experiment, and it just increased the field of addiction in psychology itself.
Thanks for watching tonight's episode. We hope to see you next time.